Hi, my name is Suzanne Reagan Lentz. I work with Sally Mathis O'Brien and My Inner Lighthouse as a work partner and business consultant. Sally Mathis O'Brien practices a unique form of counseling through My Inner Lighthouse. She is one part chaplain, one part therapist, one part medium, and all parts presence. Sally works from Gentlewood, her home on the North Shore of Orcas Island in Washington State, though she is joining us today from London to talk about a conversation that she had with Jesus on Maundy Thursday, April 1st of 2021. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Suzanne. Yes, it's March 2023 right now, and I'm in London and happy to be here. So I'm going to share this somewhat long conversation, and I went to with great pains not to change it at all since it was first written in a small journal.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. I'm up early. It's 3:45 a.m. and I'm lying on the carpet with my legs propped up on my reading chair, releasing the muscles of my lower back. I've been in a lot of pain lately. I watched the energetic figures of Jesus and Master John Douglas walk up next to me. They state, "We're going to have a talk about the truth." My attention is perked. Jesus says, "You've been crying a lot for others." I take my legs off the chair and sit down in my reading chair. John leans onto my window ledge, and Jesus lowers himself onto my bed. Me, can you explain this? Jesus, it's time you learned why this is such a tough time of year for you. You read the stories in the Bible. Some of them are true, somewhat, or at least, what is it you say? Me, every story contains a seed of truth in it. Jesus, yes. There is a significant pause. I wait. Jesus watches me open my blue Lenten journal and select a green pen. I write the words of Jesus in grass green, the color of the heart chakra. He begins to stare down into the carpet below us. Jesus, here is the truth. We were lovers. We were much more than lovers. You understood me as a man, as a leader, as a storyteller. You listened as my peer. In fact, you were my only peer. At this point, Jesus looks out through the porch window at the water. It's dark for me, but you can hear the waves breaking the shore. It was a hard time for the empire. There was instability in the ranks. The elite couldn't be sure who they could trust or not trust. As you know, the Sanhedrin was a powerful ruling force. Many decisions were made behind closed doors. Much denarii was exchanged to enable the keepers in power. My sister, Mary, learned about those who had hidden motives. She had many people in her network. Jesus chuckles. Truthfully, she was the smarter one. This allowed me to practice as long as I did. I was able to move from place to place during my ministry in a way that was always ahead of the elders. She's been forgotten in history. After we left, she eventually left as well to make a new start. I found out through emissaries she did find happiness near the end of her life. I was grateful for that. She deserved it. When you found Suzanne and we watched your relationship grow, it was like watching an old movie. This all needed to take time. You needed one another. Did you enjoy your ministry? Yes, I did, he said. I had spent some time in the East beforehand. I felt like the world was ready. People needed to wake up. People needed hope. There was so much graft. The times then were so much different from your world, it is hard to express why things happened in the way they did. But at the same time, they were in sync with the excesses and power struggles that were just eternal. Me. Did you know you were going to die? Jesus smiles at this as I remember the truth I learned not long ago. He sits in a chair in front of me, now leaning forward. This is why we are talking. You deserve to know what really happened. We were in love with one another. We bore children. Our son was such a pride to me. He smiles. He grew up strong, righteous. He was quiet. Jesus reminisces more. He was like me. He left early in search of his own path. This was the right thing for him to do, to follow. Sarah was like you. She was very fair. She had the knowing. It was beautiful for me to watch her grow. She loved exploring. She liked learning about your herbs, especially from Mary. She had a real talent there. I spent a long time observing things. I was a carpenter. I liked working with the tools. In Cephas, it was a time of great construction. There was always plenty of work. I watched the groups that would move among the people, causing them to fear, to doubt, to forfeit their money. Some of these leaders were good people. They had ideas or motives that were generally a positive thing for the community. What would happen is that these men would need to perform certain duties for the state, and they would become corrupted by the system. The good ones left. Some were never seen again. We would wonder if they were killed, but talk of this was dangerous to participate in. So the empire grew. Much of the daily work fell on the peasants, the working class. Taxes were unbearable for most. Our family was okay, but I watched many families flounder. Men who tried to better their position in society through ways that ended up dishonoring themselves and their families. Many died from sicknesses due to lack of food, clean water, lack of hygiene. Many beatings. Women, children, slaves. Life went on. It felt suffocating. I would go to the desert to find peace, to think. I like to travel to just observe smaller tuts, communities, places that formed around just a few families. They seemed happier, but I'd run out of money and go back. One day, I saw a slave being beaten, and he didn't fight back. His life was gone from his body before they finished him, and something inside me just turned. Me. What did you do? Jesus. At the time, I was making bricks. I just dropped my trowel and left the work site. I went to think. I felt I had been quiet long enough. So I took my money, and when I left town, I decided to teach others what I'd learned, especially from my travels. At first, I wanted to teach respectability. When I tried to share natural lessons, people wouldn't really listen to me. They said they weren't able to be and do what they wanted, mostly because they were just trying to survive. They needed food, water, work. What could I do about that? And they were right, of course. So I realized that in order for change to occur, something stronger had to be voiced. Understand, I wasn't the only one doing this. It was a time of upheaval. Tolerance was low. The ruling elite was nervous. You perceived the Pharisees as corrupt, but in truth, the majority were good men. They were simply trying to keep the peace. The priestly class and the political elite were trying to outdo one another. Those that were happiest were the tuts on the edge of things, allowed to command their own affairs. There was no money to be gained, as these groups tended to be nomadic. When someone wanted to tax them or burden them, they would just up and move. So I wondered whether I could create my own tut, but talk about changing things. I made a few friends. That's when you came in. You heard us talking about this one night. You offered to make meals for us. You were quiet. You reminded me of myself before I became frustrated. Something in you turned, but it wasn't like what it was for me when I saw the beating and had had enough. You turned every time I talked about my travels. You became hopeful. When I saw your hope, I became brave. Then you began to talk to me away from the men. You saw things in a way that I could not. You felt the inequities and would see the other way in a way that was more gentle, more accepting. You never got angry. I was in love. Jesus stops. Yes, we both were. The men didn't like you. At first, they were just jealous. You had a peace about you. They said you could not simply understand because you were a woman. But some of them sensed your greatness. He chuckles at this. Mary was working behind the scenes. She was a healer. Her herbs were powerful. She would raise denarii for the cause of our actions. What I didn't realize at first was that she was developing a network. She had what you would call spies, but it was less formal than that. She kept ties everywhere she went. In those days, people suffered enormously from pain. Many people couldn't pay her in tokens, but they would work in places where they could give her information. She could be trusted. This was important to me. His eyes glaze over at this point. I practiced clean ways. One of the things I learned from observing the tuts was how important the use of water was. In the city, it wasn't as easy to find and prepare clean water. I knew that was a key. I began to become more vocal. I would challenge people, their stubbornness. At night, I would talk to you. I tried telling stories to make things easier. Sometimes this helped, but mostly it didn't. The brothers would fight among themselves. They liked being led. They liked someone else to be in charge. Eventually, I became more bold. I always remained fascinated by people and their stories, like you. I wanted to meet more people, travel, eat. I was willing to listen to anyone who might have an answer to forward things. People thought I was different. I wasn't. I just enjoyed challenging the system. When I would clean wounds, people would become quiet. I like that. They would listen. The more we traveled, the more the crowds would follow us. Mary set the itinerary. She would go to the places ahead of us, find out if it was safe, where we could stay, who could be trusted. Sometimes the people who funded us were the very people in power who were tired of the constraints of the elite. I would meet them behind closed doors. This was most helpful. I would find out the inner workings of the elite. When I stormed the temple, when I turned over the tables, I was told by a Roman officer where and when to do this ahead of time so I wouldn't be arrested. That got people's attention. You didn't travel with us in town. Mary did. For a while, my message spread. Then Mary had a trusted contact at the Sanhedrin. The festival, Passover, was coming up and there was going to be a vote. Someone powerful was rising in the ranks. I never even found out who it was because she kept me away from all that. She began to get nervous. Mary never got nervous. I knew things were getting complicated. By this point, I'm not sure she knew who she could trust. She was a healer. She was useful. but women were always being taken advantage of. You two got along well, as you do now. I began to get nervous about Mary's dealings. She was forced to trust more people she didn't know she could. We were past the point of being able to stop things that went into motion. His eyes glazed over again. Mary told me I needed to leave. There was a bounty for me. She had made arrangements for a safe passage out for me. She was almost done with yours. She used up many favors, but would stick around after we left to disrupt the trails. I was concerned for Mary, but she always seemed to make things work. That was the night of the Last Supper. I told you, of course. Me. Did you tell others? Jesus, eyes glazed. No. Mary didn't think it was safe. I knew deep down she was right. There was a long pause. I decided to close my blue journal and just be with Jesus, see if there was anything he wanted to share privately. He needed my companionship, and I provided it. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Sally.
It's hard to share, but you're welcome.
Is there anything Jesus would want to clarify about his story that wasn't covered in the conversation or in the scriptures throughout history?
So I'm closing my eyes here and I'm checking in with Jesus. I see him kind of stroking his little beard, and he's saying he can't comment. He won't comment a whole lot about the Bible. He will say that, like the Sanhedrin, that the brothers were all very different, and that Judas got a bad rap. He isn't what the Bible say he was. He was definitely a zealot. He's kind of chuckling. He was outgoing and bold, more so than the other brothers. He knew he couldn't share more with the brothers. Mary was too nervous. It was more of a hectic night than is written about in your Bible, but the Bible is filled with a lot of stories, and some of those stories are called midrash. They're stories that were compiled by basically Jewish men, rabbis who were answering certain questions at the time, to help people deal with the struggles that were going on in their communities and reconciling that with sacred scripture. So a lot of the Bible has that midrash and isn't based on fact. And he's concerned about people that take the Bible so literally. He says that's not a wise thing for anyone to read something and take it literally.
Does Jesus have any advice for the folks who are starting this journey with us and My Inner Lighthouse?
Oh, that's a great question. He's saying, oh, okay. So what he's saying is he's disappointed that a lot of people are not taking the time to read the stories on the website. There are a few people that have been avid readers and read everything out there, but people are continuing to be shocked by some of the stories that I share that are already out there with the different ascended masters. And Jesus doesn't consider himself any more wise than any of the other masters. So he wants people to start in their heart and ask the questions they want to ask and look at the website and join us. He's saying the purpose of what we're doing here is we want to start a community and talk about these things. It's easy to sit back and consider things on your own and maybe talk to your spouse or your friend about how you feel about things. And it's quite another to meet out in public and talk about the tough questions.
So it's almost like you're creating a tut community on the fringe.
That's exactly right.
Very fun. And very supportive. I mean, I think it's what a lot of people need
And
at this point.
Yeah, he wants to share that he understands this is not a small thing that we're sharing. He wants us to know with the public that what we just shared is what we call a big deal. And he doesn't take it lightly. And that anything of such consequence should be thought about, reflected upon, and it may not be the truth for all people, and that's fine. But the point is to have the conversation. The point is to discover the truth for yourself, what's true for yourself.
And I think, we can see that in the fact that you had this conversation with him almost a year ago, and that it's taken you
2 years ago. This was 2021.
2 years ago. Yeah. COVID. It's my COVID brain.
Right. That's okay.
2 years ago. And now you're just bringing this information forth.
Yeah. And I think the timing is important. So the topic of our conversation was about respectability. And sometimes we get frustrated. I'm speaking for Jesus right now. He's saying sometimes we get frustrated watching what's going on at the world when there's not enough respectability. It's not just humans that get frustrated. We get frustrated.
Mm-hmm. And so what were your lessons on respectability that people weren't able to hear at the time?
That's a good question. I thought it was important. It's always important to take personal responsibility for not only your actions, but for your thoughts and the way you feel and what you believe in. He says, I think you'd agree with me that it's easy to be kind and to be friendly with those that you love. It's quite another thing to offer assistance to someone who isn't accepted readily in society. He's calling me out. So today he's calling me out. This is good. So today I walked to the post office in London, and I walked by a woman who was a large woman who I believe she was a mother, and she was sitting down and she was begging and she was looking for money. In the States, I might have considered giving her money, and I wasn't comfortable having a conversation with her because I didn't have change. I wasn't able to make change. And I let my discomfort drive my decision to not stop and talk with her. So that's a perfect example of I felt a little shamed and guilty, and I just passed her up twice. I walked going into the post office and I walked by her coming out. Those are the type of little decisions that we have to go into our own hearts and decide how can we respect ourselves in daily behavior. What he's calling us to do, what they're all calling us to do, is to become a little bit more bold, to think about our actions more, to get in touch with what are the virtues, what are the principles we want to live with by in our daily life, and begin to perhaps look at a higher code and begin to act as the leaders that we want others to be. It's very easy to look at our politicians. It's very easy to look at the news and think, why shouldn't so-and-so do something? It's much tougher to look inside and see how we can be act a little differently or think a little differently.
Yeah, and life always gives us these really great moments to reflect. Like, you know, your moment with the woman sitting outside the post office. Like
Yes.
we get to reflect on those things daily, on those incidents, and how
Yes.
can we shift our behavior.
Yes. It's interesting how trauma works. Trauma follows us. Trauma follows us throughout our lives and reveals different lessons and wisdom as time goes on. And it's a conscious decision on our part to continue to learn from those events, or we can ignore them and just continue to act on impulse or act on what we think are different ideas of being fulfilled or successful. This was very hard for me to walk away from my brothers. It took a long time for me to share this with Sally. It's not something I am proud of. It's not something I like to talk about, but it's time that I shared it with her, and it's time for, I would say, most people to look into their hearts and begin to discover a way to change, to turn, and to find some forgiveness for themselves as well as others.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
It's a really,
Suzanne.
really wonderful story. And for our viewers, if you want to follow us on Patreon or Instagram, or check out myinnerlighthouse.com. If you have any questions, you can always drop them below in the comment section. And we would love to further this conversation with you.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you listen to this again. I know there's a lot of wisdom in what Jesus shared with us.